My son said the farm is mine now. He had no idea about the deed I filed last spring. Emmett drove out on a Saturday morning in April with his attorney and a transfer deed he had drafted without asking me. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten breakfast every morning for 41 years, and he said, "You're not capable of managing this anymore, Mom. Just sign it over and we'll take care of you." Lacey was beside him. She did not look at me. She set her hands in her lap and studied the coffee mug in front of her, the way people study things when they are hoping not to be noticed. I looked at the table. I had set a folder on it before they arrived, before Emmett had even pulled his car up the red clay drive. Before his attorney had taken off his coat, I had already set that folder where I knew everyone would see it. Inside it was a 2-page recorded instrument from the Amherst County Clerk's office, a correction deed filed 14 months earlier, stamped at 10:17 a.m. On a Thursday morning in February, with my name on every single line and my notary seal pressed clean into the acknowledgement block. My farm is 220 acres. The eastern parcel alone, the 40 acres that had carried a title defect since my husband's death, was valued, once that defect was cleared, at $640,000. Emmett's attorney had not pulled a full title search before driving out to my house that morning. I asked him, very quietly, if he would like to see my filing. Good day, dear listeners. It's Ren again, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tap the like button. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I love seeing just how far these stories travel. People always say that age makes you smaller. They say the longer you do a thing, the less the world believes you understand about it. I have heard that said about farmers especially. Past 60, they say, the land becomes too much. The paperwork too dense, the decisions too consequential for someone of a certain age to carry. I used to find that idea almost amusing. I have been farming the same 220 acres for 41 years. I know this land the way only sustained attention can teach you. Which fields drain fast after a heavy rain? Which fences hold in a wet March? Which acre carries more value than the plat suggests because of how the river light falls on the east end in the morning? I also know how to read a deed. I know how to read a title commitment. I know how to identify a defect in a legal description from a document filed in 1983. And I know the exact instrument in Virginia law that exists to correct it. Emmett never asked me what I knew. He came out to my kitchen table with a draft and an attorney and the word capable in his mouth like a verdict. He had not once thought to ask what I had been doing quietly, carefully, for the 14 months before he arrived. The storm was already over before he walked through the door. I was 30 years old when my husband Roland and I paid $210,000 for 220 acres of Amherst County farmland. I have not regretted a single dollar of it in the 41 years since. We drove out in October of 1983 to sign the papers. I remember the smell of the fields that day. Iron-rich clay. Dried grass. The particular cold that Amherst County gets in late October. A clean cold that comes down from the Blue Ridge and settles into the low places around the South Fork of the Ty River. We had enough to make the down payment, and not much more. Roland had saved for 6 years before we had the figure. I had been keeping the household accounts with a kind of discipline that might have been mistaken for frugality, but was really just clarity. I knew what we were working toward. I knew what every dollar needed to do. We sat at a conference table in a law office in Livingston, Roland and I, and we signed the deed. The paralegal notarized our signatures. That was that. The land was ours. $210,000. 41 years. Still mine. Worth more than 4 times what we paid. Every acre of it clean. Roland farmed the cattle side for the first 20 years. I managed the books. I kept the extension office records as a volunteer for 8 years. I learned the administrative side of land ownership the way I learned most things, by reading every document that came across the desk until I understood it completely. By the time I sat for my Virginia notary commission, I had been reading title commitments and plat maps for a decade. They were not mysteries to me. They were just documents. Documents have rules. I have always been comfortable with rules. The Virginia Extension Office work gave me something I could not have anticipated when I started it: a thorough education in how land changes hands in Central Virginia. I learned all the ways that paperwork can quietly determine the outcome of those changes. I sat at a desk in the Extension Office twice a week for 8 years. I filed records. I cross-referenced plats. I read the deed abstracts that came through as part of the agricultural program documentation. I saw what happened when a description was imprecise. I saw what happened when an estate was probated with a title that had not been reviewed. I saw what a cloud could do to a family, not dramatically, not quickly, but slowly, the way a small leak does damage. Drip by drip, until the floor is rotten. I filed all of that away. I thought about it during the 40-minute drive home from the extension office on evenings when Roland had the children and the fields were quiet. I thought, if I ever find a problem in our title, I will know what instrument to reach for. Roland died 12 years ago. He was 62, and he died in the spring, which felt wrong. A spring death on a working farm, when everything is supposed to be coming forward. I buried him in April, managed the cattle through May, and filed the estate paperwork by June because the farm did not stop needing me simply because I was grieving. I raised 2 children on that land. Emmett left for Charlottesville at 24 for a logistics career. He came back at Christmas and at Easter and occasionally in the summer. Every time he came, he spoke about the farm the way people speak about things they intend to inherit. Not with malice, just with that particular comfortable certainty that some children develop when they have decided a thing will one day be theirs. He was not wrong that he would inherit it eventually. He was profoundly wrong about the timeline. And he was wrong about his understanding of what he would be inheriting. My daughter Renata visited less often. She said less about the land. But when she came, she walked the fence lines with me. She asked about the hay yields. She helped me read through the annual title insurance update without being asked. She had a quality I recognized from myself at her age: a willingness to engage with the actual thing in front of her, rather than the version of it she had projected in advance. Renata worked as a paralegal in Richmond. That had not been planned by either of us. But it turned out to be the kind of biographical coincidence that makes sense only in retrospect. When I explained what I was researching, she did not need me to explain a correction deed. She already knew what it was. The farm office is a small room off the east side of the main house. 4 decades of filing cabinets. A desk that Roland built in 1987 from oak boards he had cut from a tree that came down in the storm of '85. A window that looks out over the red clay fields toward the tree line. On the wall, there is a large format plat map, framed, showing all 220 acres in blue boundary lines, the fields, the river boundary at the south, the fence lines, the access road. I had that map framed the year we bought the land. I wanted to see what I owned. I have looked at it every day since 1983. 14 months before Emmett's Saturday visit, I took a red marker and drew the outline of the eastern 40-acre parcel directly on the plat map's glass. I was marking the boundaries of the land that had been carrying a cloud since Roland's death. I looked at that red outline every morning when I sat at the desk. It reminded me what I was working on. The problem had a specific shape and a specific location. The solution would also have a specific shape. A 2-page instrument filed at a courthouse counter, stamped and certified and placed in a folder. Problems with shapes have solutions with shapes. I have always found that useful. The notary press sits on the desk in the corner of that office. A hand press, older model, steel and black, the kind that leaves a clean embossed seal in heavy paper. I have used it for 30 years. My commission number is embedded in that press, and my name, and the Commonwealth of Virginia designation, and the expiration date of my current commission. It is not a decorative object. It has notarized hundreds of documents over 30 years, farm leases, affidavits, acknowledgments, bills of sale. It would, eventually, notarize the most important document I ever executed on my own behalf. But that morning, 14 months before Emmett arrived, it was just sitting on the desk, where it always sat, unremarkable, waiting. Do you know the particular weight of a problem you have been carrying for 11 years? Not a crisis, just a quiet, persistent thing, a stone in your shoe that you have learned to walk with, because the timing was never right to stop and remove it. The probate attorney who reviewed Roland's estate flagged the title defect the year he died. He said it clearly. There was a gap in the legal description of the eastern 40-acre parcel in the original 1983 deed. A technical imprecision in the metes and bounds description. A course listed as beginning at one monument when the recorded survey showed it beginning at an adjacent monument. It created an overlap. The parcel's legal boundaries were imprecise on the face of the instrument. The attorney said it was a cloud, not a crisis. He said I could address it when I was ready. He probably expected me to hire someone to handle it. He did not know me well enough to know that I was already reading the Virginia Code. I filed it away. I thought about it for 11 years. Every January when the annual title insurance update came in, I reviewed the schedule of exceptions. The list of items the policy would not cover. And there it was, the defect, small and patient, right where it had always been. 11 years of watching it sit there. 11 years of paying the premium on a policy that still excluded the very thing I most needed cleared. And every year, as I reviewed the update, I thought about what that defect would mean to Emmett when the farm eventually transferred. Not in grief, just in practicality. A title cloud on a 40-acre parcel worth more than $600,000 is not a small thing. And the one certainty I carried through all 11 of those years was that I was not going to let an old paperwork problem become someone else's leverage. There is a thing that happens to women who work alone on something important, without telling anyone. People who are accustomed to knowing your plans begin to make assumptions. Emmett had watched me age through his 20s and 30s and into his 40s. With each decade, he had quietly added another item to his mental list of things he believed he would eventually need to manage on my behalf. He never said it plainly. He was not a plain speaker about those things. But I had watched him long enough to read the subtext. He believed that the farm, the paperwork, the operations, the decisions, all of it was accumulating weight I could not much longer carry. He was waiting. With the particular patience of someone who believes time is on their side. He did not know that I had spent the previous 11 years doing the most consequential paperwork of my life in the quiet of the farm office, with no audience and no announcements. The first sign that Emmett had begun moving on his own timeline came gradually, the way most warning signs do, not in a single conversation, but in a pattern of small, revealing moments. In the 2 years before the pressure visit, he started describing the farm's operating expenses as unsustainable. Not to me directly. He said it in the side rooms, in conversations he was having with Lacey when he thought I was outside or down the hall. I overheard it 3 times in 2 years, The farm was not sustainable at this scale. The liability exposure was significant. The transition needed to happen before things got worse. He said it the way people say things they have already decided. Not as an open question. As a premise. Something so settled it barely needed discussion. He used the word transition the way actuaries use it, not as a possibility, as an inevitability. I did not say anything. I listened. I went back to the farm office, and I sat at Roland's desk, and I looked at the red outline I had drawn on the plat map. And I thought about the Virginia Code section I had been reading on correction deeds. I thought about the fact that Emmett had been calculating the farm's assessed value in his head for at least 2 years. The assessed value he was calculating included the eastern 40-acre parcel, as if it were clean and unencumbered. It would not be clean on the day the title search came back. Not until someone corrected the defect. That someone was going to be me. The second sign was documentary, and it arrived 8 months before that Saturday morning. Lacey sent a text message to my daughter Renata asking what the farm's current assessed value was. Renata showed me the message on her phone, standing in the kitchen on a Sunday afternoon in August. She showed it to me without comment, which was the correct response. I read it twice and handed the phone back. The message was politely worded. It asked about the total acreage value, and specifically about the eastern section. She had evidently heard Emmett mention the eastern parcel, or perhaps she had pulled a county tax record online. The eastern parcel is listed separately there because of how the survey was recorded. She knew there was an eastern section. She did not know what I had already done about it. Renata looked at me after I handed her phone back. She said, "Are you going to tell him?" I said, "Tell him what?" She smiled, a small, dry smile that she had inherited from me and from 41 years of Amherst County weather. She said, "Fair enough." She poured herself another cup of coffee, and we moved on to discussing the fence situation on the north boundary, which was a more immediately pressing matter. I spent the following week pulling every document out of the filing cabinet that related to the 1983 deed. I laid them out on the desk in the farm office in chronological order. The original deed, the 1983 survey, the probate review notation from 12 years prior, the 11 annual title insurance updates, each one listing the defect in the schedule of exceptions. I sat at the desk for 3 evenings with the Virginia Code open beside me. I read the statutes on correction deeds until I understood the instrument completely. A correction deed, sometimes called a corrective deed or a deed of correction, is a recorded instrument used to fix a defect in a prior deed without voiding the underlying conveyance. In Virginia, when the grantor and grantee are the same party, when a property owner is correcting their own prior deed, the instrument can be executed as a deed to self. The owner serves as both parties. I read the self-disclosure provisions applicable to notarization when the grantor and grantee are the same individual. I read the case citations. I read the circuit court opinions. And then I called Josephine Wangi. I had known Josephine by reputation for a long time before I called her. She had handled agricultural real estate in Amherst County for 20 years. She was known in the county agricultural community as someone who understood both the law and the land. That is not as common a combination as you might expect. When I explained what I was working on, she did not tell me I was in over my head. She asked me to send her what I had. I sent her the 1983 deed, the survey, the probate attorney's flagged defect notation from 12 years prior, and the correction deed research I had compiled. She called me back 2 days later. We spent 2 hours on the phone going through the language. She had suggestions on 3 specific points: the description of the correcting course in the metes and bounds, the disclosure language in the acknowledgement block, a procedural point about how the self-notarization disclosure should be worded to make the instrument's validity unambiguous on its face. We incorporated all three. She reviewed the final draft. She told me the instrument was sound. She said she would provide a written review notation for the file. I said I would appreciate that. She said she would have it to me by end of the week. The review notation arrived on a Friday afternoon. It was 2 paragraphs, a summary of the defect being corrected, and a statement that the correction deed as drafted was a valid instrument for its stated purpose under Virginia law. Josephine had signed it and dated it. I put it in the folder behind the correction deed. Together, those 3 pages, the original defect description, the correction deed, and Josephine's review notation, were the complete story of what I had done and why I had done it. Before I filed, I called Josephine one final time. I asked her, plainly, whether there was any argument that could be made against the instrument's validity once it was recorded. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the self-notarization provision was clear, the deed to self mechanism was established, the defect description was precise. The only question, she said, was whether whoever reviewed it understood Virginia title law well enough to confirm the answer quickly. I asked what she meant. She said that if someone wanted to challenge the instrument, they would need to find a grounds that did not exist in the statute, and finding something that does not exist, she said, takes longer than confirming something that does. I told her that was useful to know. She said she thought so too. The night before I drove to the courthouse, I sat at the desk in the farm office for a long time. The notary press was on the corner of the desk where it always sat. The correction deed was in front of me, executed, signed on the grantor line, signed on the grantee line. The acknowledgement block completed with the self-disclosure language Josephine had reviewed. My notary seal pressed clean into the heavy paper of the acknowledgement page. The embossed seal was sharp and clear. My name, my commission number, the Commonwealth of Virginia designation, the expiration date. I had pressed it twice to make sure the impression was complete. It was. I looked at the plat map on the wall, the red marker outline of the eastern parcel. 4 decades of farming that land, and for 11 of those years the legal description had carried an imprecision that I had watched every January in the title insurance schedule of exceptions. 1 filing, 1 stamped instrument. And the defect would be gone. I turned off the desk lamp and went to bed. Have you ever driven to do something important and felt, the entire way there, a kind of very clear, very deliberate calm? Not excitement, not nervousness, just the calm that comes when you have done the work, when you know the instrument is correct, when you know the filing is valid, and you are simply completing the procedural step that makes it official. That is how I felt driving to the Amherst County Clerk's office on a Thursday morning in February. The dogwood trees along the road were still bare. It was cold. A thin frost on the clay shoulders of the county road. I parked in the lot adjacent to the courthouse, carried my envelope to the door, and went to the recording counter. The clerk who took my instrument was a woman who had been working that counter for at least 10 years. I had filed documents there before. I recognized her careful manner, the way she reviewed each page without commenting on the contents. She went through the correction deed, page by page. She looked at the recording information. She checked the acknowledgement. She stamped the upper margin of the first page. The stamp read the date and the time, 10:17 a.m. She handed me the certified copy and said, "Ma'am, you're all set." I thanked her. I put the certified copy in my folder. I walked back out to the cold February morning. I sat in my truck for a moment with the certified copy in my hand. The stamp was clean. The date was clear. And the eastern parcel was no longer carrying a cloud. I did not tell Emmett. He had not asked. He had been having private conversations about the transition. He had sent his wife to ask about assessed values through text messages. He had not once called me to ask about the title status of the land he expected to receive. So I kept the certified copy in the folder on my desk. And I went back to farming. In the months between the filing and Emmett's April visit, I did not stop with the correction deed. I had started something, and I intended to finish it correctly. In the same month I filed the correction deed, I called my insurance agent and renewed the farm's agricultural liability policy. I had reviewed the renewal carefully to ensure my name appeared as sole insured, with the updated legal description of the eastern parcel reflecting the corrected title. The policy premium was $2,400 annually, which I paid from the farm's operating account as I had always done. I also called the farm's business bank and updated the authorized signatory designations on the operating accounts. Renata was designated as successor signatory, replacing the joint designation that had existed since Roland's death, the one I had never updated in the 12 years since. These were not dramatic gestures. They were administrative corrections. Malcolm Reed, who has leased the back 80 acres for hay for 7 years, came by in January to talk about the spring planting schedule. We sat at the kitchen table and went through the lease terms. Malcolm is a steady man. He farms the way he talks, which is carefully and without waste. He had driven up in his pickup at 7:30 in the morning, and we had sat at the kitchen table with coffee and the lease document between us and gone through every line. His lease rate was $8 per acre for the 80 acres, $640 per month. That was the rate we had set when he first started leasing the back section 7 years prior. It was slightly below the current county average because Malcolm maintained the fencing on the leased section at his own cost. That maintenance was worth more than the difference in rate. He asked whether there had been any changes to the lease situation. I told him no, nothing had changed, and that I was thinking about extending the terms by 2 years when we came up for renewal in the fall. He said he appreciated the stability. I told him stability was something I was working on. I called Josephine in March to let her know that I expected Emmett to come out sometime in the spring, and that I wanted her available by phone if needed. She said she would clear a Saturday if I gave her a few days' notice. I told her I thought it would be a Saturday. She asked how I knew. I said Emmett had never been interested enough in the farm to take a weekday off for it. She gave a short, dry laugh and said she would be available. When Emmett called on a Thursday to say he was coming Saturday with someone to help get things organized, I already knew what Saturday would look like. He did not tell me the someone was an attorney until Renata called me Friday evening. She had heard from Lacey that an attorney named Greer was driving out. I thanked Renata and called Josephine. Josephine said she would be there at 9:30. She would park on the far side of the barn and come in through the kitchen door. That way I would have time to let Emmett begin before introducing her. Let him place his document. Let him say his piece. Let him believe, for a few minutes, that the morning was proceeding according to his preparation. That night I set the folder on the kitchen table. I put it in the center, where it would be visible the moment anyone sat down. The correction deed was on top, with Josephine's review notation behind it and the certified copy's recording stamp facing up. I made sure the coffee was ground for the morning. I put on my field boots, the ones I wear every day regardless of what else is happening, and I went to bed at 9 o'clock. I was up at 5:30. I checked the eastern fence line, the boundary of the 40-acre parcel, because there had been a weak post I had flagged the week before. I wanted to confirm it before the spring ground softened further. The dogwood trees along that fence line were in first bloom. White blossoms, very clean in the early morning light. The kind of early April morning that Amherst County produces when the spring is cooperating with the season. The Tye River was audible from the fence line. Not loud, just present, the way it always is when the water table is high after a wet winter. I walked the full boundary of the eastern parcel, 280 yards of fence line, every post solid, the wire tight. $640,000 of clean, clear, defect-free farmland. A morning in April with the dogwood trees in bloom and the river running full below the ridge. I went back to the house, made coffee, and waited. Josephine arrived at 9:28. She came in through the kitchen door, set her briefcase on the counter, poured herself a cup of coffee without asking, and sat down at the far end of the kitchen table. She looked at the folder, looked at me, and gave a small nod. I gave one back. We did not need to rehearse anything. We had already reviewed every document together. We knew what Greer would ask and what the answers were. The only unknown was how quickly he would reach the conclusion, and whether Emmett would accept it quietly or with difficulty. Emmett's car came up the drive at 10 minutes past 10. He was never quite punctual for the farm. I watched from the kitchen window as he and Lacey and a man in a gray suit came up the porch steps. I heard Emmett's voice before he opened the door, saying something low to Greer on the porch, a last instruction, or a last reassurance. I could not tell which. The door opened. Emmett came in first. He looked older than he had at Christmas. He was 44, but carrying the particular tightness around his eyes that men carry when they have been rehearsing something for a long time and are now arriving at the moment they rehearsed. He sat down at the kitchen table. He looked at me. He looked at the folder. He did not pick it up or ask about it. Lacey sat beside him and set her hands in her lap. Greer set his briefcase on the chair to Emmett's left. He opened it. He placed a document on the table. A draft transfer deed. My name and Emmett's name on the cover page. A transfer amount left blank. A set of conditions written in the body that I had not been consulted about. Emmett looked at me with something that was not quite an apology and not quite an accusation. It was the look of someone who has decided something is necessary and has accepted that doing it is going to be uncomfortable. He said, "Mom, you're not capable of managing this anymore." He said it evenly. He had practiced it. I could tell, from the cadence, that he had said this sentence to himself many times before he said it to me. We're not trying to take anything from you. We just want to make sure the farm is managed properly, and that means transitioning it while we can do it cleanly. He paused. Just sign it over and we'll take care of you. The room was quiet. The coffee machine had finished its cycle. Outside, through the kitchen window, I could see the eastern fence line and the white dogwood blossoms along it in the morning light. I looked at the draft transfer deed on the table. I looked at my son's face. I looked at Lacey's hands in her lap. And then I looked at the folder in the center of the table. The folder I had set there the night before. The correction deed on top. The recording stamp facing up. My notary seal pressed clean into the acknowledgement page. I said, "Before we discuss that, I'd like you to look at something I filed 14 months ago." I opened the folder. Greer looked at the correction deed for approximately 10 seconds before he picked it up. He read the header. He read the recording stamp. He looked at the filing date, February, the previous year, 10:17 a.m., and he read it again. He read the acknowledgement block, where my name appeared as notary and my commission number and my notary seal were embedded in the paper. He set it down. He looked at Emmett for a moment, and then he looked at me, and he said, "May I ask who drafted this instrument?" I said, "I did, with a paralegal's review. My attorney reviewed the final version before execution." He said, "Your attorney is?" The kitchen door opened, and Josephine walked in from the office hallway where she had been waiting. She set her coffee cup on the counter. She said, "Josephine Wangi. I reviewed the correction deed before filing, and I am present today if there are questions about its validity." She sat down at the end of the table. She opened her briefcase with the unhurried precision of someone who already knows how the next several hours are going to go. Greer looked at Josephine for a moment. Then he looked back at the correction deed. He said, "Miss Okafor, I'd like to look at the full document." I gestured toward the folder. He read through both pages, the full correction deed, the legal description of the eastern parcel as corrected, the grantor-grantee identification, the execution block, the acknowledgement block. He paused at the acknowledgement. He read it a second time. He said to Josephine, "The acknowledging notary and the grantor/grantee are the same individual." Josephine said, "Yes. Virginia Code permits self-notarization in a deed to self-correction when the grantor and grantee are the same party, with proper disclosure, which is reflected in the acknowledgement language. Would you like the statutory citation?" He said he would. She produced it, a printed sheet with the relevant code section highlighted and the applicable provision underlined. He read it. He made a note on his legal pad. Emmett watched this exchange from across the table. He said, "What does that mean?" Greer said, quietly, "It means the instrument is valid as executed." Emmett looked at me. He said, "What is this document?" I said, "It's a correction deed. It resolves the defect in the Eastern Parcel's legal description, the one that has been in the title since the 1983 deed. The defect was identified in the probate review when your father died. I had been aware of it for 11 years. 14 months ago I corrected it. The title to the eastern 40 acres is clean." Emmett said nothing for a moment. He looked at the deed. He looked at the recording stamp, the date, the time, the clerk's mark in the upper margin. He looked at the notary seal in the acknowledgement. His seal, that is to say, my seal, which I had pressed into the paper of the document that corrected my own title on a Thursday morning in February. While he was in Charlottesville, presumably at his desk, not thinking about Amherst County at all, Greer said to Emmett, carefully, "Did you know about the title defect prior to today?" Emmett said no. Greer made a note. He said, "That is significant." He paused, choosing his words precisely. "If the defect were something your client intended to use as a basis for any argument about the property's management or transfer, the correction predates any such argument by 14 months. It eliminates that approach entirely." He looked at the deed again. "And the capacity question, do you have any documentation supporting a capacity concern?" Emmett started to say something. He stopped. He looked at Josephine. He looked at me. He looked at the correction deed on the table, the 2-page instrument that I had researched, drafted, reviewed, executed, notarized, and filed without asking anyone's permission, without telling anyone it was happening, because it was my land and my title and my defect to correct, and I had done it myself. Then, Greer's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. He said, "I need to step out and make a call." Josephine said there was a room off the hallway. He picked up his legal pad and his phone and walked through to the farm office. He was gone for 11 minutes. I watched the kitchen clock. Emmett sat at the table and did not speak. Lacey stood and took her coffee cup to the counter and stood with her back to the room, looking out the kitchen window at the fields. Josephine reviewed a document in her briefcase. I drank my coffee. The April light was moving through the east facing windows by then, low and warm across the plank floor of the kitchen. The same light that had come through those windows every April morning for 41 years. Have you ever sat in a room while something you spent years preparing waited to be confirmed? Not with anxiety, with patience, with the very specific piece of someone who has done the work and knows what the work says, and is simply waiting for someone else to finish reading it. Greer came back. He sat down. He did not place any new documents on the table. He set his legal pad face down. He said, "I've confirmed with the title insurance representative. The correction deed cleared the defect in the most recent annual update. The eastern parcel's title is clean. All 220 acres are under Miss O'Gaffer's name as sole fee simple owner, unencumbered." He paused. "There is no title defect available as a basis for any argument regarding management capability or transfer. And on the capacity question, based on the documents before me and the conduct I have observed in this room, I am not able in good conscience to advance any capacity argument. The documents are correctly drafted, correctly executed, correctly filed, and correctly notarized. There is no legal avenue for an involuntary transfer mechanism. None." Emmett looked at the plat map on the farm office wall. He had turned in his chair and could see it through the office doorway. The blue boundary lines of all 220 acres. The red marker outline I had drawn around the eastern 40-acre parcel 14 months ago. The parcel that had carried a title cloud since Roland's death and was now clean, certified, recorded, and unassailable. He looked at that red outline for a long moment. He looked at the framed map and the red lines I had drawn and the fields beyond the window and the dogwood trees along the eastern fence line in their white April bloom. Then he turned back and looked at me. He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "You didn't ask." He looked at the table. The correction deed was still in front of him. My name as grantor, my name as grantee, my notary seal in the acknowledgement, the recording stamp at 10:17 a.m. On a morning in February, when he had been in Charlottesville, not thinking about the eastern parcel at all, he looked at the table for a long time. His jaw moved once, as if he were going to say something, and then he did not say it. He looked away first. Lacey set down her coffee cup. She stood up quietly and went to the kitchen, and I heard the coffee machine begin to cycle again. She did not come back to the table for several minutes. Whether she needed the coffee or needed something to do with her hands, or simply needed to not be in that room for a moment, I could not say, and I did not ask. Greer gathered his documents. He placed them back in his briefcase, in the precise order he had removed them, which told me something about the kind of attorney he was. He stood. He extended his hand to me. I shook it. He extended his hand to Josephine. She shook it. He said, "Miss Okafor, Miss Mwangi." He picked up his briefcase. He did not say anything else. He walked to the door. Out to the porch, down the steps. A moment later, his car started in the drive and moved down the red clay road toward the county highway. Emmett remained at the table. The correction deed was still in front of him. He did not pick it up again. He just looked at it, the way you look at something you did not expect to find. Josephine looked at me across the table and said, "I'll send you the updated certificate of title confirmation by Monday." I thanked her. She said goodbye to Emmett, who nodded once without speaking, and let herself out through the kitchen door. I heard her car pull away from behind the barn. The kitchen was quiet. Just Emmett and me and the April light on the plank floor. The notary press sat on the desk in the farm office, where it always sat. Unremarkable done. I did not say anything generous. I did not say anything that could be mistaken for a victory speech. I said, "Stay for lunch if you want." He said yes. Lacey came back with the coffee and poured it. We had lunch. We talked about the weather and about the dogwood trees and about a section of fence on the north boundary that Emmett offered to help look at in the afternoon. After lunch, he and I walked the north fence in the April light, a quarter-mile of fencing along the top of the ridge, the Blue Ridge visible to the west, the river audible below. We found a weak post. Emmett drove it deeper with the post driver while I held the wire. We did not discuss the correction deed. We did not discuss the transfer deed that Greer had driven away with in his briefcase. We finished the fence work and went inside, and I made sandwiches and we ate them at the kitchen table. The folder was still on the table. Neither of us moved it or mentioned it. We ate our sandwiches. He left in the early afternoon. He waved from the drive. I waved from the porch. The day after Greer drove away, I went into the farm office and sat at the desk. I pulled the red marker off the shelf. I uncapped it. I drew a second line on the plat map's glass, a clean line along the full outer boundary of all 220 acres. Not just the eastern parcel, the whole farm. I stepped back and looked at it. Blue lines for the original boundaries, red for the correction I had made, red for the land that was now, without any ambiguity in any recorded document anywhere, entirely mine. I put the cap back on the marker. I set it on the desk next to the notary press. I went back to the kitchen to start the morning. In the weeks after Emmett's visit, Josephine and I met twice at her office in Amherst to review the full picture of the farm's legal condition. We went through the title policy and the updated schedule of exceptions, clean now, without the eastern parcel defect in any column. We reviewed the agricultural liability policy renewal documentation. We looked at the operating account signatory designations. Josephine said the farm was in better legal condition than it had been at any point in its history. She said she had seen similar situations before, families and land, and the particular expectations that form when someone stands at a distance from a thing they have decided they will one day receive. She said the situations that ended well were the ones where the woman with the land had attended to the paperwork before the conversation. I said I thought that was right. She said she had been glad to be there on Saturday. I told her I had been glad too. I refinanced the farm's operating line of credit in June, a $22,000 line that I had been carrying at a rate of 6.8%. The new rate was 5.3%. Over the term of the credit line, the difference came to more than $900 in reduced interest costs annually. I signed the documents at the bank's conference table, read every page before signing it, and initialed each amendment paragraph myself. The loan officer was efficient and professional and did not once suggest I might benefit from having someone present to help me understand the terms. I had a good opinion of him for that, and I told him so. In July, I sat down with a drafting attorney to prepare a revised estate plan. It was a revocable living trust that would pass the farm to Renata as successor trustee without requiring probate. The structure would keep the land intact through the transfer and out of any court process that could create a delay or an opening for a challenge. The trust document named the specific lease rights that Malcolm Reed held on the back 80 acres. That way, the hay lease would survive the transfer without requiring renegotiation. The trust named the farm's operating accounts and the agricultural liability policy by specific reference. Every document connected to the farm was connected to the trust, in a chain that would be clear to any attorney who reviewed it in the future. Renata reviewed the plan with me on a Sunday afternoon in late July, sitting at the kitchen table with the documents spread between us. A pot of coffee. The particular quality of July light that comes through the west-facing kitchen window in the afternoon, warm and late and unhurried. She asked every question she should have asked. She understood what she was reading. She asked about the lease terms for Malcolm, and about the insurance renewal schedule, and about the filing cabinet organization. She did not ask about the assessed value. In the fall, I called Malcolm and we met on the porch on a September Saturday to discuss the lease extension. The Blue Ridge was visible above the tree line to the west in the clear fall blue of Amherst County at the end of summer. I offered a 2-year extension at a modified rate, a small reduction in the per-acre amount, in exchange for Malcolm covering the reseating costs on the back 20, which had been thinning and needed attention. He said yes, immediately, and without negotiation. That is the response of someone who trusts the terms and values the stability. We shook hands on the porch. I typed the modification. We both signed it. Josephine reviewed it. It went into the filing cabinet behind the original lease. The back 80 acres would continue to produce. The farm would continue to operate. Nothing had changed, except that every legal document attached to the property was now precisely, unambiguously, indisputably mine. Emmett visited twice in the following year. Both visits were brief, and both times he came without his attorney and without a briefcase. In August, he helped me move a section of fencing on the eastern boundary, the line of the 40-acre parcel, the parcel whose title was now clean. He drove the posts and stretched the wire, and did not mention the correction deed, or the Saturday in April, or the document that Greer had driven away with. We worked through the afternoon and went inside, and I made sandwiches, and we ate them at the kitchen table where the folder had once sat waiting. The folder was in the filing cabinet now, behind a tab-marked correction deed recorded. The table was just a table again. We ate. He left in the early afternoon and waved from the drive. I waved from the porch and watched the car move down the red clay road until it was gone. Malcolm drove up the following Tuesday with a baked ham wrapped in foil, set it on the kitchen counter without ceremony, and asked whether the lease was still good. I told him it was. I told him the extension was filed, and nothing was going to change it. He said he appreciated knowing. We sat on the porch in the April light, the second April since the correction deed. The dogwood trees in bloom again along the eastern fence line, the Ty River running below the ridge. We talked about the fields, about what the winter had done to the back section's grass cover, about the fence post situation on the north boundary, about how the eastern parcel was draining since the December rain, and what we could do about it before the summer. We talked about the farm the way people talk about something they are tending together. The ham was good. The coffee was good. The April light on the red clay fields was very good. Emmett thought age was a vulnerability. He thought a quiet cloud on a title description was an opening he could wait for. He thought the word capable was his to define. He believed he could arrive at my kitchen table with a drafted deed and a borrowed attorney, and that the mathematics of the situation would work in his favor. He was 44. I was 71. That, he believed, was the whole story. But the correction deed disagrees with him on all three counts, in a document filed at the Amherst County Clerk's office at 10:17 a.m. on a Thursday morning in February, 14 months before he drove up the red clay road with his briefcase and his argument. The land I have farmed for 41 years is not diminished by the years. It is documented more precisely, owned more completely, and understood more thoroughly than at any other moment in its history. And neither am I. If you had been at that kitchen table, dear listeners, if someone who was supposed to love you looked across the table and said, "You are not capable anymore," and placed a document in front of you that they fully expected you to sign, would you have opened the folder? I would love to know what you would have done. Tell me in the comments. And if you know someone who has ever been underestimated by the people who expected to outlast them, share the story with them. They may need to hear it. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next one.